Hello everyone. I'll continue the series about Bobby Fischer by covering his game from the 57-58 US Championship. The last video was on his immortal game of the century against Donald Byrne, and this one is played 1 year later, so after he was already very well known in the States and in the world for being a great child chess prodigy, and at the time it wasn't that common to have grandmasters at 13 or 14. He was actually the youngest one in history a year after this game, so he was considered one of the biggest hopes of world chess by this point. And this was the first US championship he won. He finished with 10.5 after 13, a full point ahead of his biggest rival for the title, Samuel Reshevsky, who had a 9.5, so it was a great achievement for young Bobby, and this was the first of many US championship he will win in the years to come. In this game, this was round 5, he played with the white pieces against Arthur Bisguier, who a few years earlier was better than Fischer, but by this point, by the time Fischer was 14 in this game in 57, he was much too weak for Fischer, and he actually finished, I'm not sure in which, I think in the 11th place, so he was one of the worst players in this championship. And Bobby had the white pieces. He opened with pawn to e4, best by test. Bisguier plays e6, the French defense, d4, d5, knight to c3, Bobby plays the Winawer French, bishop to b4, e5, these were all the main moves. This is now the advanced Winawer French. And in this position, Arthur Bisguier deviates from the mainline theory, which would be c5, immediately striking in the center and trying to disrupt white's central control and gaining a lot of counterplay for black and immediately equalizing actually. And the variation would go a3, forcing the bishop to capture on c3, bishop takes, b takes, knight to e7, queen to g4, attacking g7, and after castles it's slightly better for white, but black has great chances, and he could either push with c4 or take on d4, and after that open up his bishop on the a6 square, so black would stand fine. But in this position after e5, Bisguier went for b6, which is also a theoretical move, but it's rarely played, and there's only about 500 games with b6 and several thousand with c5. After b6, Bobby plays a3, which is the main move, chasing the bishop away, or which would be inferior. The best is to take the knight, so Bisguier takes, b takes c3, and now queen to d7, which is an imprecise move, but there's a point behind it. White's plan usually is to develop the queen to g4 to attack g7, and what Bisguier had planned with the move queen to d7 was to play f5, and now after f5, of course, the g-pawn is still defended, and Bobby can't really take en passant, because if e takes f, then knight takes f, black is gaining a tempo, and after queen to h4, black is perhaps even slightly better. So after f5, which was the plan, the queen just retreats to g3, and the queen on d7 is slightly misplaced. The knight would probably want to come to d7 to prepare the c5 push some more, but it's okay, the knight can go to, after c5, the knight can go to c6 as well. In this position he plays bishop to a6, trading the light squared bishop, but it wasn't such a good move. There were better moves to play, and probably c5 was the best option at this point. Bobby takes, knight takes a6, misplacing the knight a bit, because from a6 it can't really go to any useful square, because b4 and c5 are covered. So in this position Bobby stands better, he has a slight edge. He plays knight to e2, developing one of his last minor pieces, and in this position Bisguier plays a really risky plan. He castles queenside, which, okay, perhaps it would give him a lot of counterplay, but it's too risky, and considering the fact that the b file is open and that white almost has a ready-made attack with the c4 push and opening up the position, the queen is able to come to b3 or to c3, and I think white is much better practically here, and positionally much better as well, and the engine will tell you the same. You can see this bar on the right side of the board, and you can see the evaluation if you'd like. So castles queenside is a mistake, but a very aggressive move, and practically black stands a chance to equalize and to attack, but he will have to play fast and not lose any time. Bobby responds with a4 immediately, just opening up the queenside, and it's like giving a target to a bull, and he's just striking immediately. King to b7, defensive move, but he has to do something, and you can see immediately that it was much better to push c5 and to open up the queenside, castle kingside for black, and his king would now be safe on g8. And he would have a lot of counterplay with c5, and now his only break in the position can't be played because it would weaken him too much. Bobby here first of all castles, getting his king to safety, and if you consider one of the main criteria of a chess position, the king safety, then you can immediately see the white is almost completely winning. And the pieces are more active for white as well. The knight on a6 is completely misplaced. The only square it has is b8, but from there it could only go to c6, and I would say that practically speaking black is lost here. He plays queen to f7, the point of which I don't really understand, but he was trying to play queen to h5 and attack the e2 knight and exchange queens somehow. Bobby plays c4, the most active move, opening up the queen side. Knight to e7, bishop to g5. This is a slight inaccuracy by Bobby, but okay, he's pinning the knight. And you could argue that the bishop is worse than the knight, which is now on e7, because the knight could find an outpost on a square such as e4, and the bishop is pretty much locked out of the game because of d4 and d5. So you could say that the knights are better than bishops in this position because the center is closed, especially the dark squared bishop, which Bobby has. Now d takes c4, Bisguier opens up the lines and attacks d4, queen to c3, knight to d5, gaining a tempo on the queen, but it doesn't really do anything because the queen would like to recapture c4 anyway. So Bobby takes, queen takes c4, rook to a8. He had to move the rook, of course, because it was attacked by the bishop, and the only reason why he didn't have to move it earlier is because he had a tempo on the queen, which was on c3. Now bishop to d2, the bishop did its job and chased the rook away, and now it's supporting the a5 advance and opening up the black's king's position completely. f4, trying to get some counterplay, but it's too slow and black doesn't really have an attack. And if you count the attacking pieces, white has 3 attacking pieces next to black's king, and black only has 1, which is the queen on f7 at the moment. The knight could get into the game, but it would take him several moves. And the f3 push isn't really that scary, as Bobby will prove. Rook to a3 now, which is a great defensive and attacking move, preparing to double rooks, but also covering all the key squares along the third rank and preventing almost any counterplay by black. And this move now made the position so dominant for white that black, I think, should have resigned, but perhaps he didn't realize he was this worse off. g5, trying to attack, a5, opening up the position, c6, trying to solidify things, but this is in fact a weakening move because it's weakening b6 even further, and I think c6 shouldn't have been played. A takes b6 by Bobby, a takes b6, queen to b3, attacking the b6 pawn, knight a to c7, c4, chasing the knight away, and now Bisguier gets a couple of tempi with rook takes a3, queen takes, rook to a8, gaining a tempo on the queen once more, queen to b3, and now he has to retreat the knight, so knight to e7. And Bobby just puts on more pressure and plays knight to c3, which is looking at 2 key squares in the position, which are d6 and f6. And if you imagine the knight coming from e4 to either of those squares, especially to d6, then you can see that black's king is in terminal danger. And now queen to f5 by Bisguier. He's trying to attack, and perhaps after h5, h4 and g4 he would have an attack, but he would need several tempi to do that, so Bobby has a free hand on the queen side pretty much to develop his own attack. Queen to b4, attacking the e7 knight. Knight goes to c8, now knight to a4, getting closer to black's king. f3, but I mean, Bobby just plays knight to c5 check, first of all gaining a tempo because the knight can't be taken. Of course, the knight is pinned, so you can't take bc5. And now, after king to b8, he plays knight to d7 check, another tempo, king to b7, and now queen to b3, ignoring the fact that white can take on g2, because that would just make white's king completely safe, because he would simply move the rook to b1, and then there would be no way for black to further attack the white king. And he plays queen to g4 here. Okay, now he's threatening mate in 1, and after knight to c5, another tempo, the knight can't be taken. King to b8, Bobby plays g3, not fearing any possibility of queen to h3 and mating on g2, because in that case queen would just simply take f3, and until f3 is protected, there is no way for black to checkmate Bobby's king. Now Bisguier makes another mistake. He plays queen takes d4, which is just a waste of time. I mean, okay, it's a central pawn, but in this position you can't really allow yourself to do that. Bobby improves his bishop with tempo, bishop to e3, attacking the queen, defending the knight some more. Queen goes to a1. And now a brilliant move by Bobby. Of course, in this position, he can't take the queen. This is not even a sacrifice, because if rook takes a1, then rook takes a1. This is checkmate because of the f3 pawn. And Bobby will just have to give up his pieces until mate. So this doesn't work. And after queen to a1, Bobby plays a marvelous move. He plays rook to b1. Now, of course, Bisguier can't take the rook. He could just sacrifice his queen. And now Bobby is threatening a lot of things along the b file. And now the game continues with rook to a3, gaining a tempo on the queen. Knight to d7 check, king to b7, queen to d1, defending the knight, supporting his entire position. And now after queen to a2, knight takes b6. Of course, the pawn was attacked 3 times, and Bisguier could have defended it, but he didn't. Perhaps he reasoned that activating his queen would be more important, and I think he was trying to get it to e2 and exchange the queens, but who knows. Anyway, after knight takes b6, rook takes b6 check, king goes to c8, and now queen takes f3 by Bobby, which is engine-wise a mistake. He could have had a better position with a move such as bishop takes g5, but practically speaking, you have to get rid of this pawn, because in many variations, black is actually threatening checkmate, and this is now completely safe for white, and he just can't lose. And after he took on f3, it's winning, and black doesn't even have any counterplay. The fact that he had a more precise move doesn't really matter, because you're playing a human and you have to watch out for tactics. You are not a machine. After queen takes f3, Bisguier actually returns the favor and he takes on c4, which doesn't really make any sense. And now his position is so busted that even if he had an extra rook on the board, he would lose. So now queen to f8 check, king to d7, and queen takes a3. This is a simple geometry, just winning the rook, which the queen undefended the rook by moving from a2, and this simple combination wins extra material for white. And now, of course, it's a whole rook up, equal on pawns, and completely winning. Even if white didn't have the extra rook, he would be winning, because the position is so dominant. Okay, everybody, thanks very much for watching, and I hope you liked this video about Bobby Fischer versus Bisguier in the US Championship, and stay tuned for 48 more videos about Robert James Fischer. Thanks very much. Bye.